She didn't scream when he shattered her trust. She didn't beg when he turned their home into a prison. She only whispered one final promise: I won't carry your hatred anymore. But what happens when the woman you pushed away is the only one who ever truly saw you? Why would a woman say yes to a man who vowed to never love her? Why would she stay through silence, cruelty, and years of being invisible? And when the truth finally comes to light, too late, too raw, what remains regret or the chance to begin again. This isn't a tale of perfect people or easy love. It's about a woman who loved quietly, survived fiercely, and disappeared without a trace, and a man who only realized what he had lost when the house felt colder without her in it. But when fate throws them together one last time in blood, in pain, in truth, will love still have the strength to rise? If you believe love isn't always gentle, but sometimes worth fighting for, even when it hurts, then this story was meant for you. Before we begin, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more stories that will stay in your heart long after they end. Now, let's begin. The golden leaves of early November fluttered in the wind, dancing their final waltz before surrendering to the quiet earth. Inside the grand, ivy-clad estate of Sterling Manor, the hush was heavier than silence itself, a pause that carried the weight of impending goodbyes. In the heart of the drawing room, where once laughter had echoed and light poured freely through stained glass, sat an old woman cloaked in burgundy velvet, Eleanor Sterling. Once a name that commanded entire city blocks, was now a woman faded by illness, yet unbowed by it. Her hands, gnarled by time, clutched a walking cane like it was the last truth she could hold. Before her stood two souls destined to collide. Nathan Sterling, her grandson, had the bearing of a man who owned every room he stepped into tall, with cold eyes that seldom betrayed anything but control. 32 winters had shaped him into a fortress no one dared enter. At the opposite end of the room sat Claire Bennett, a woman of quiet fire and grace, just past her 28th birthday. She looked fragile in that moment, but there was steel behind her gaze, a kind of strength born only from surviving too much, too young. Eleanor broke the silence with a voice that cracked like dry leaves in wind. Before I go, I need to see something made right, even if you cannot understand it now. Her words were not a request. They were the whispered will of a woman who had stared death in the eye more than once and come back only to mend one final bond. She turned to Nathan, then to Claire. Marry each other. The room didn't gasp, because the room already knew. Nathan exhaled slowly, leaning against the window frame where dusk painted shadows across his face. His jaw tightened. He didn't look at Claire. He didn't need to. If this is what you need to rest, then I'll do it. But love, don't expect that. Claire blinked once. And in that blink was a world of heartbreak, of memories not yet told. Her hands, folded in her lap, trembled only slightly. She owed Eleanor everything: her chance at an art education, her dignity when life had threatened to swallow her whole. If this was the price, she would pay it. I never asked for love, she said softly. Only a little peace. If this gives you that, then I'll say yes. Eleanor's eyes brimmed, not with triumph, but with sorrow. She reached for Claire's hand, her fingers cold. He is not cruel, Claire. Just broken in places no one has ever touched. Nathan turned then, walking slowly toward Claire. Each footstep echoed like thunder in her chest. He stopped in front of her, looking down not at her, but through her. I won't lie to you. I don't forgive. I don't forget. And I will never believe your story. Claire met his words with stillness. Her reply came not as protest, but as truth carved from stone. Then believe what you need to, Nathan. But I won't carry your hate for you. His lips curled not into a smile, but something harder, colder. "The ceremony is on Sunday. Don't be late." And just like that, he walked out, leaving the scent of ash where there should have been jasmine. Claire didn't cry. She had cried enough in her life to fill rivers. Instead, she turned to the woman who had once been her rescuer and whispered, "You've given me a life. Eleanor, if this is what it costs, I will see it through." That night, Claire stood alone on the balcony, the wind tugging at her sleeves. Below her stretched the gardens wild now, no longer tamed by loving hands. She stared into the falling night and whispered not a prayer, but a vow. "I will not lose myself in this house. Not again." Far away, beyond the curtains and polished glass, Nathan stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching her silhouette against the dying sky. Something inside him stirred, something he didn't recognize yet. Or perhaps something he had buried long ago. And so began a marriage not of love, but of promises, some spoken, others carved silently into the soul. "I only want you to find peace," Claire whispered, her voice gentle yet unwavering, a final offering of grace. Eleanor smiled faintly, though her frail frame trembled. Tears slipped quietly from her weathered eyes, carving trails down skin lined by time. But that peace Claire wished for unraveled in an instant. The sharp rhythm of Nathan's shoes against the wooden floor cut through the quiet like a warning bell. He stepped forward, tall and composed, but his presence brought with it the cold of winter. He loomed over Claire, his shadow swallowing her slender form. "Don't mistake this arrangement for something it's not," he said, voice low and sharp like splintered glass. "You will never have my affection. You forfeited that the moment you destroyed someone I cared about." Silence rushed in like a tide. The air thickened. Servants paused mid-step, eyes cast low. Eleanor gripped her chest with a shaky breath, but said nothing. She was too tired to battle the ghosts now dancing between them. Nathan turned to leave, but Claire's voice rose, soft but cutting through the stillness like wind slicing through fog. "You think you know my story?" she asked, lifting her chin to meet his icy stare. "Then hold on to your hatred, if it keeps you warm." Nathan halted, if only for a heartbeat. For a single breath, the armor he wore cracked. He didn't respond, only scoffed, his lips curling with derision. How dramatic. "Are you trying to win me with cryptic lines?" He turned once more, brushing past her. "The wedding's on Sunday. Be ready. Or don't. It changes nothing." He disappeared down the corridor, but her words clung to his mind like a whisper he couldn't shake. Eleanor reached for Claire's hand, her voice barely audible now. "He's hurting, far deeper than he shows. Just be patient." Claire nodded, but a quiet ache settled in her chest. This was not a romantic promise, not a fairy tale beginning. It was a sentence, a sacrifice she had chosen to carry, not for herself, for Eleanor, and the man she would marry in 4 days. He didn't just distrust her. He believed her capable of unforgivable things. He thought she had shattered the life of his closest friend. As night blanketed the sky, Claire stepped onto the manor's weathered balcony. The wind whispered through the gardens below, wild and overgrown. Somewhere deep inside, she asked herself a question she could not answer aloud. Can anything grow from this cold? And yet, beneath her silence, a flicker stirred. Not hope, not yet, but something more stubborn, the will to endure. A past stained by rain. 7 years earlier, in a city cloaked in clouds, the rain seemed endless. It fell every day for over a month, soaking the narrow alleyways and cobblestone streets of a forgotten district, the one Claire had once called home. She had just turned 21, a girl with paint-stained fingers and stars in her eyes. Her world was small, a cramped studio, a leaky roof, and canvas after canvas she could barely afford. The scent of turpentine clung to her skin like a second soul. Life had never offered her much. Orphaned before she was old enough to remember lullabies, Claire had clawed her way through college, working shifts that ended just before dawn, sketching between tasks to stay sane. Then came Daniel Hayes. He was 27 then, laughter in his voice, charm in his smile, and something gentle in the way he saw her paintings. They met in the most unremarkable of places, a local art fair Claire had organized in desperation to make rent. She had set up her work under a patchy tarp, not expecting anyone to stop, but he did. He bought her a painting of a field drenched in rain, a piece she had nearly thrown away. "It looks like something waiting to bloom," he'd said, holding it like it was made of gold. Daniel was warmth in a season. Claire thought she'd only survive, not feel. He brought her late-night takeout, listened to her stories, and once painted her name badly on her wall just to make her laugh. He was Nathan's closest friend. But more than that, he was Claire's beginning or so, she thought. She didn't ask for promises. She asked only to be seen. And in Daniel's eyes, she thought she finally was. Daniel had a mind built for bridges and blueprints, but a soul made for warmth. He was the kind of man whose presence softened a room, whose laughter filled the gaps between silence. To Claire, he arrived like sunlight after a long, gray storm. Their paths crossed on a quiet afternoon, beneath a patchy tent at a neighborhood art fair. Claire was there only to try and pay her rent, her paintings strung up on makeshift ropes, trembling in the wind like fragile secrets. He stopped in front of one, a flower field beneath a heavy gray sky, and asked how much. "I don't know," she'd replied. "I only painted it because it wouldn't leave my mind." He smiled, that easy, open smile that never asked for anything but always made you want to give. "Then that's exactly why I want it." From that day, Daniel became a constant in her life. He'd show up at her door just past dusk, bringing warm sandwiches wrapped in napkins and stories about engineering deadlines he never seemed to care about. Claire, who had grown used to being alone, began to forget what loneliness tasted like. Their love didn't roar. It bloomed quietly, sincerely like spring breaking through frost. She found peace in the way he held her hand while she painted, in the sound of his breathing beside her when they watched the rain, in the silence they shared when no words were needed. For the first time, she imagined a future, not with diamonds and ballrooms, but with bare feet in a sunlit kitchen, children's laughter in the garden, and an old radio playing while she painted. But dreams, no matter how softly they're built, still shatter. It was a Thursday evening, close to his birthday, when she decided to surprise him with a gift, a painting she had poured her heart into. She carried it with both hands, the canvas still smelling faintly of oil and memory. Rain fell in sheets, soaking through her coat as she reached his apartment. When the door opened, it wasn't just Daniel who greeted her. There was another woman, tall, confident, golden-haired. She leaned into Daniel's side as if she belonged there. Claire froze, her breath caught between her ribs. Daniel's eyes widened in panic. "Claire, it's not." But the explanation never came. It didn't need to. The truth had already spoken in the silence between them. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply let the bag in her hand fall, the painting slipping onto the rain-soaked floor, its colors bleeding away like a wounded heart. Then she turned and walked into the night, her steps silent against the thunder. Daniel called after her, but the rain drowned his voice. Claire never looked back. The next morning, she sent a single message: "Don't look for me. We're finished." Then she turned off her phone, locked her door, and collapsed beside her easel, where unfinished paintings stared at her like ghosts. For 3 days, she didn't speak to anyone. She didn't eat. She let the grief rot in her chest until it had nothing left to consume. She buried that love with her own hands, but the story didn't end there. 2 nights after their final parting, Daniel climbed into his car with too much whiskey and too little reason. He never made it home. His car collided with a tree at the edge of a quiet road, just outside the city limits. There were no witnesses, no second chances. Death came quickly and without mercy. News reached Nathan first. Daniel had been his friend since college, his brother in everything but blood. Nathan arrived at the crash site minutes after the paramedics. He stared at the crumpled wreck, at the sheet that covered Daniel's lifeless form. His eyes didn't weep. His fists did. They clenched so tight, his nails broke skin. Why, that question burned like wildfire in his mind. And when he searched Daniel's phone, when he found that last message from Claire, he stopped asking. To Nathan, it was clear. The girl with the soft eyes and struggling past had betrayed his friend. She had discarded Daniel for ambition or convenience, perhaps for someone richer, someone with a future not painted in second-hand colors. He asked around. Friends spoke in murmurs Daniel had been drinking heavily, spiraling after the breakup. No one knew the details, but Nathan didn't care. In his heart, the verdict had already been passed. Claire Bennett was a siren in disguise. A girl who used her beauty as currency, a storm that had ripped his best friend from him. And once Nathan believed that story, nothing, no truth, no voice, no tears could unwrite it. The pain of losing Daniel didn't turn Nathan cold. It turned him cruel. Nathan's hatred lived like a second heartbeat, pulsing, quiet, and ever-present. For nearly 6 long years, it kept him company in place of forgiveness. He promised himself he would never allow Claire Bennett to hurt another soul the way she had, and especially not under his roof. But Nathan didn't know the truth. He didn't know that Daniel had betrayed Claire first, that her silence wasn't born from guilt, but from devastation, the kind of ache that seeps into your bones and makes you question if love had ever been real to begin with. On the night Daniel died, Claire was alone in her apartment, curled on the hardwood floor, clutching a pillow like it might hold her together. She had cried herself empty, not because she hated him, but because she had loved him too much and still lost. News of Daniel's death didn't reach her until 3 days later. A mutual friend stopped by with eyes full of pity and a voice barely steady. Claire simply nodded and closed the door. She told no one. She didn't attend the funeral. She didn't try to explain. In her mind, the past had already been buried. Instead, she painted. She taught art to children on the city's forgotten streets. She clung to color, to canvas, to creation, anything that would keep her from vanishing entirely. It wasn't healing. It was survival. That was when Eleanor found her again at a charity event in the old city library. The older woman took Claire's hand as if she had been waiting for her all along. Her kindness became the light Claire hadn't realized she still needed. But fate, as always, had a cruel twist. Eleanor Sterling was Nathan's grandmother. The same Nathan who now looked at Claire like she was a storm waiting to destroy everything he loved. The same Nathan who had built his empire with bloodless logic and a frozen soul, who trusted no one and loved even less. The moment he saw Claire near his grandmother, something snapped. In his mind, the story played out clearly. She had returned, older but just as dangerous, using Eleanor's affection as a way back into the Sterling legacy. He believed what he needed to, not because it was true, but because it kept his grief alive, and Nathan had grown far too used to the weight of grief. So he watched her. Every kind gesture, every quiet word, every smile Claire offered Eleanor, he twisted into a performance. To him, she was a girl playing a long game for wealth and redemption she didn't deserve. And if she dared enter his world again, he would make sure she paid the price. The wedding took place on a gray morning thick with frost. Even the sky seemed unsure whether it should snow or weep. The ceremony was held at a cathedral older than memory, where light filtered through stained glass like ghostly color on stone. There were no petals on the aisle, no music except for the quiet shuffle of feet and the occasional cough into gloved hands. Claire wore a simple ivory gown chosen by Eleanor I with no frills, no lace, just clean lines and soft fabric that whispered as she walked. In her hands, she clutched a bouquet of white carnations, Eleanor's favorite. They trembled in her grasp. Beside her, Nathan stood as still and silent as the marble angels above them. He didn't look at her. He didn't smile. He recited his vows like he was reading terms on a contract he had no intention of honoring. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, he didn't reach for her hand. He turned and walked away. Claire remained standing, the chill from the stone floor rising up through her spine, her heart heavier than her veil. They returned to Sterling Manor as strangers sharing a roof. The estate was vast corridors that stretched into silence, windows taller than trees, and rooms filled with beauty but no warmth. It was like living in a museum, curated by grief and guarded by ghosts. Claire held onto a small hope, foolish perhaps, that something might shift now that they shared a home. That proximity might melt something in Nathan's heart. But it didn't. He barely spoke to her. When he did, his words were clipped, mechanical. "Why are you in this room? I don't need anything from you." He never used her name. In the mornings, she woke before sunrise to make breakfast, hoping the scent of toast and warm tea might soften his edges. But he'd glance at the plate and walk out without touching a bite. The staff, well-dressed and trained in silence, offered no judgment, only pitying glances when they thought she wasn't looking. One evening, Claire dropped a glass in the kitchen. It shattered on the floor like a cry that had been waiting to escape. Nathan entered moments later, his voice a blade, figures. "Can't even hold a glass. I don't know why she ever believed in you." Claire said nothing. She knelt down, gathering the shards quietly, her hands steady even as her throat burned. She no longer tried to explain herself. She had learned long ago Nathan wasn't listening. Each dawn, Claire rose before the sun, clinging to routine like it was the last thread keeping her anchored. She moved through the quiet kitchen with deliberate care, crafting small gestures of warmth, toast browned to golden perfection, eggs with yolks bright as marigolds. She set the table with quiet hope, imagining just once they might sit together, not as strangers, but as husband and wife. But when Nathan stepped into the room that morning, dressed in sharp lines and colder silence, he merely glanced at the plate before him. A smirk twisted across his lips, as if her effort amused him. "You think breakfast will melt years of disgust," he said flatly. "Stop pretending to be what you're not. I don't need your pity or your kindness." He turned and left without touching a thing. Claire remained frozen, her fingers digging into the edge of the table, turning her knuckles pale. Around her, the staff busied themselves with invisible tasks, their eyes carefully averted not from duty, but mercy. Nathan's cruelty didn't live in shouting matches or slammed doors. It whispered in the spaces where affection should have lived. It echoed in hallways with no footsteps but her own. He humiliated her subtly, a sneer here, a dismissive word there. At gatherings, his words came laced with poison, just loud enough for others to hear, as if he needed to remind the world she didn't belong here. One evening, Claire reached for a glass and misjudged the distance. It slipped from her hand and shattered, the sound sharp in the hollow silence of the kitchen. Nathan appeared in the doorway within seconds, the newspaper still folded in his hand. He looked at the shards, then at her. You can't even manage a glass without turning it into a disaster. He muttered. Why she ever believed in you, I'll never understand. Claire didn't respond. She knelt to the floor, collecting broken pieces with steady fingers. Silence had become her only defense, a fragile armor she wore to protect what little pride she had left. She no longer tried to explain herself. She knew it would never matter. Late one night, when she noticed the light still on in his study, she gathered her courage and brought him a cup of tea jasmine. The kind Eleanor said helped him sleep. She stepped inside quietly, placed the tray down with care, and took a breath. Nathan barely looked up. With a flick of his wrist, he shoved the tray aside, sloshing the tea across the polished desk. What now? He said, coldly. Money attention. Do you think this charade will change what I see when I look at you? Claire lowered her eyes and left. Behind her eyes, a storm churned not rage, but something more dangerous, despair, exhaustion. She didn't bring him tea to win favor. She brought it because of a promise to Eleanor, who still believed Nathan had something worth saving. Eleanor was the only warmth in that house of glass and ice. Though her strength was fading, her presence wrapped Claire in fragile peace. In the afternoons, Claire would sit by her bedside, listening to stories from a world that had once been kinder tales of love letters, stolen kisses, and the grandfather Nathan never knew. Eleanor's voice, though soft, still carried the weight of hope. He's not a cruel man, she said once, gently squeezing Claire's hand. He's just forgotten how to be anything else. Be patient with him. I believe you're the one who can remind him. Claire smiled, because that's what Eleanor needed. But inside, her resolve was fraying. Love cannot grow in a place where it is constantly starved. The mansion, though beautiful, began to feel like a prison. Each hallway seemed longer, each chandelier colder. The servants whispered when they passed her, not cruelly, but with the sadness one reserves for something precious that's slowly unraveling. Every time she crossed paths with Nathan, she felt the invisible wall between them higher, thicker, more impossible to breach. So she ran, not from the house, but into the only space that was hers, a small art room tucked into a forgotten corner of the estate, gifted to her by Eleanor. There, she found air. There, she remembered who she had once been. She painted in silence strokes heavy with longing, canvases full of skies that wept, fields that bloomed only in gray. It was the only place she allowed her pain to live freely, without judgment. Because in that room, even if, just for a moment, Claire Bennett was not a wife by name only. She was an artist. She was herself. Every night, when Sterling Manor surrendered to darkness, and even the chandeliers seemed to sigh in exhaustion, Claire slipped away into her sanctuary, the small studio Eleanor had given her. There, surrounded by canvases and whispers of paint, she let herself breathe. Her brushes moved like memory across linen. She painted meadows under silver skies, streets drenched in rain, and the blurred outline of a man she once trusted. A man whose absence still echoed in every color she chose. These weren't just paintings. They were confessions, wounds turned into brushstrokes. Loneliness softened in oil and hue. Sometimes, tears fell onto the canvas, blending with the paint and turning careful lines into blurred truth. One evening, as she stood before a canvas portraying a solitary figure in a rain-drenched city, she heard footsteps. She turned, startled. Nathan stood at the doorway, silent, unreadable. His gaze drifted to the painting, a faceless man lost beneath falling rain. He took a step forward, his voice like frost on glass. "Is that Daniel? Or just another fool you clung to for convenience?" Claire's hand tightened around her brush, her heart stinging at the cruel accusation. But she said nothing. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because it would change nothing. Nathan waited for her to respond. When she didn't, he scoffed and turned away, leaving only the sound of the door closing behind him. And in his absence, her loneliness deepened. As the seasons shifted, Claire herself began to fade. She was no longer the woman who had once fought storms with nothing but paint and stubborn hope. Now, she was a shadow that moved quietly through the halls, Eleanor's quiet companion, Nathan's invisible wife. She fulfilled her duties, brought tea, stayed silent, smiled when she had to, but each day chipped away at something vital. Eleanor noticed. Sometimes she'd reach out with a frail hand and whisper, "Don't give up on him yet. I know he's lost. But you still have light." Claire wanted to believe her. But the mirror told a different story, one of a woman growing dim. Her reflection no longer held fire, only ashes. One night, standing before her easel, she finished a new painting, a girl in a field of wilting flowers, her back turned to the sky. There was no face, only posture, quiet resignation. Claire stared at it for a long time, then whispered to the empty room, "How much longer can I survive like this?" No answer came, only the breath of winter slipping in through the cracks, curling around her like sorrow. Spring crept into Sterling Manor with false promises, jasmine blooming at the edge of the garden, breezes softer than silk. But in Claire's chest, winter held fast. It had been nearly a year since the wedding, and her marriage had not thawed an inch. Nathan remained distant, sharp-edged, and ready to wound, not because he enjoyed cruelty, but because he had long ago mistaken it for control. Claire no longer waited for change. She endured. For Eleanor. But everything began to unravel on a quiet April morning. Nathan had entered his grandmother's study to retrieve some documents. As he opened her desk drawer, his eyes fell on a neatly folded receipt, a recent bank transfer. His name wasn't on it. Claire's was. The amount wasn't small, and it had come from Eleanor's private account. A strange cold crept into his spine. He picked up the paper, rereading the description. Support for Claire Bennett. His hand curled into a fist. The questions didn't come, only conclusions. He didn't pause to ask Eleanor. He didn't ask Claire. He didn't wonder. To him, this was the final confirmation. She had fooled his grandmother, wormed her way into their lives, played the perfect wife while siphoning money from an aging woman too kind to see the truth. Everything he had suspected, now, in his mind, became fact. She's exactly who I thought she was. He felt nothing but fury. What Nathan didn't know, what he never tried to know, was this. In the quiet corners of their lives, Eleanor had tried many times to give Claire something, a gift, a gesture, a little dignity to ease her burdens, but Claire had refused each time. And when the funds did come, she had them redirected every cent to the children's art charity she had once founded in secret. But Claire never mentioned it, because she believed, naively perhaps, that silence would speak for itself. Nathan had long stopped listening, and so the final misunderstanding was planted, deep and cruel, a fire ready to ignite, and the storm that would come next, neither of them would be ready for it. Each time Eleanor insisted on sending Claire financial support, Claire would quietly reach out to the family's private attorney, Mr. Henry Grayson, and instruct him to redirect every penny. The funds were transferred straight into the Sterling Foundation, the very charity Nathan's grandfather had once built to provide for underprivileged children across the city. Claire never touched a cent. She had hoped that by staying silent, she might avoid Nathan's wrath. But in her heart, she knew the truth no matter what she said. He wouldn't have believed her anyway. Meanwhile, Nathan held the bank receipt between his fingers like a weapon. His jaw tensed, and a cruel smile flickered at the corner of his lips. "She's poison," he muttered. "Looks harmless, but she's been coiled around all of us the entire time." He didn't rush to confront her. No, Nathan wanted an audience. He wanted her humiliation to be public, undeniable. He waited for the perfect moment, and fate handed it to him. That moment arrived on a rare sunny afternoon in late April, the day of Eleanor's 80th birthday. Despite her illness, she insisted on a celebration. The manor was dressed in soft gold and ivory. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, and the long dining table was adorned with roses and lace. Guests filled the room, distant relatives, close family, even several of Nathan's business partners. It was a rare union of blood and legacy. Claire wore a simple emerald gown that Eleanor had picked out for her. Her hair was pinned into a low bun, and her makeup was light, just enough to hide the sleepless nights. She stayed near Eleanor's side, helping her greet guests, handing out slices of cake with practiced warmth. Her smile was gentle, but behind it was the weight of months spent trying not to break. Across the room, Nathan stood in silence, a glass of red wine in his hand, watching. To him, every gesture she made was a lie, every smile a rehearsed act. His mind had already condemned her, and tonight he would make sure everyone else did too. As the evening unfolded, Eleanor rose with a trembling glass and called for quiet. Claire stood beside her, holding her hand to steady her. "In all my years, I've received many gifts," Eleanor said, her voice delicate but clear, "but none more precious than this girl who stayed beside me when everyone else drifted away. Claire is the light that warmed my final season." The room erupted in gentle applause, but it was shattered in an instant. Nathan slammed his glass onto the marble table. The sharp clink rang out like a gunshot. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. He stepped forward, each footfall echoing through the vaulted space. "I'm sorry to ruin your evening, Grandmother," he said, voice flat and cold. "But I can't let this lie continue." Claire froze. Her hand still held Eleanor's, but her breath caught. Nathan raised a piece of folded paper into the air, the receipt. "This woman you praise so highly has been taking money from you. Large sums, discreet transfers from your private accounts, all while pretending to live modestly. She's not here for family. She's here for fortune." The room held its breath. "She fooled you, Grandmother. And now she's fooling everyone here, but not anymore." Eleanor gasped. Her hand flew to her chest. "Nathan, what are you talking about? That's not true." "Claire would never, don't," he interrupted, his voice sharper now. "You don't know who she really is." He turned toward Claire, his eyes like shards of winter. Tell them why you needed the money. Or are you going to pretend again?" A terrible silence stretched across the room. Some guests looked to Claire with confusion, others with suspicion. Whispers flickered from one corner to another like smoke. Claire didn't defend herself. She could have. She could have explained the donations, the redirection, the fact she had never taken a coin for herself. But instead, she simply looked at Nathan. For a moment, she wanted to scream, to cry, to demand justice. But she didn't. She knew he wouldn't hear her. Not really. Instead, she turned to Eleanor and gently said, "I'm sorry." Then she walked away slowly, with dignity, though every step felt like walking through fire. Behind her, Eleanor's voice trembled. "Nathan, what have you done?" But Nathan said nothing, because the silence in his chest, once filled by Daniel, had just grown darker. "You've all been deceived," Nathan declared, holding the damning paper like a sword. This woman doesn't deserve your affection, or your name, or a place in this family. Claire stood in the center of the grand hall as the air thickened around her. The applause from moments earlier had died, leaving behind whispers sharp as glass. She felt every stare, heard every hushed voice curling into suspicion. Each murmur pierced deeper than the last. She wanted to speak to explain that the money was never hers, that it had gone straight to the foundation, that she had never asked for a single thing. But her voice caught, her throat tightened, words dissolved. Across the room, Nathan's eyes gleamed, not with justice, but with something darker, the bitter pleasure of revenge. He had waited for this moment, crafted it with precision, not to protect Eleanor, but to destroy Claire. Eleanor tried to rise from her seat, her hand trembling against the table. Nathan, enough. You don't know what you're talking about. But the strain was too much. Her knees gave way, and she sank back into the chair, her chest rising and falling with difficulty. Claire rushed to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, her other arm steadying the woman who had been her only light. "Don't worry," Claire whispered, voice barely audible. "I'm okay." But Nathan wasn't finished. He took a step closer, his voice laced with disdain. Still pretending, still hiding behind those tears. "You think that's going to convince anyone I told them from the beginning you don't belong here? You're nothing but a parasite who destroyed Daniel, and now you're bleeding my grandmother dry." That was the moment everything shattered, not because of the cruelty. Claire had endured worse, but because something inside her, something small, bright, and stubborn, finally flickered out. She looked at Eleanor, then at the people whose eyes refused to meet hers, and slowly let go of the hand she was holding. Then she stood, straight and still. Her eyes, though wet with unshed tears, were clear. She didn't defend herself, not because she couldn't, but because she no longer saw the point. She turned and walked away, each step quiet, but steady a farewell carved in silence. No one stopped her. No one moved. Eleanor's voice called out behind her, "Claire, please, don't go." But Claire didn't turn around. She walked out onto the veranda, where the spring breeze smelled faintly of jasmine and rain. The garden below glowed under the soft evening lights, untouched by the storm that had just torn through the people inside. A single tear slid down Claire's cheek, but she didn't cry. She only whispered to herself, voice trembling, "I can't live like this anymore." That night, she didn't return to the master bedroom. She stayed in the studio, surrounded by unfinished canvases, half-used paints, and silence. The once sacred space felt colder now, like even the colors had given up. She sat by the window until morning, staring at a painting she hadn't touched in weeks, a girl with no face, walking into a storm. The conflict had reached its peak. But what hurt most wasn't the betrayal. It was the truth that no matter what she gave, it would never be enough. Summer arrived with cruel heat, but within Sterling Manor, the temperature felt frozen. Grief settled in like dust, heavy and undisturbed. Eleanor's health, already fragile, declined rapidly after the disaster at her birthday celebration. The illness that had haunted her for years now moved with final certainty. The once lively woman spent her days lying quietly in her sunlit room, windows open to let in the faint breeze, the scent of roses drifting through. Her eyes, once bright with affection, had dulled with fatigue. Claire stayed by her side, every day. She read to her from Eleanor's favorite novels, told her stories about the paintings she used to make stories Eleanor had already heard 100 times, but still smiled at like they were new. They spoke little. They didn't need to. Time had grown precious. Every breath, every shared silence was a gift Claire clung to with shaking hands. She knew the goodbye was coming, and this time, She wasn't sure her heart would survive it. Even Nathan, for all his coldness, all his walls couldn't ignore the ache tightening in his chest as Eleanor grew weaker by the day. He never entered her room, but often stood just beyond the door, where the crack in the wood allowed him to witness quiet moments he pretended not to care about. He would see Claire seated beside the bed, her hand gently wiping Eleanor's brow, her voice soft and low, telling stories meant to soothe. And yet, instead of softening him, those moments made him burn. To him, it was all part of her act, a performance, refined over time, aimed at earning favor until the matriarch passed and she would finally claim the home and name she never deserved. He couldn't stand it. He couldn't bear the thought of her staying in this house after Eleanor's death, wearing the title of Sterling like it was hers to keep. The end came on a quiet afternoon, the sky outside weeping a steady rain. Claire sat beside the bed, her fingers curled around Eleanor's fragile hand, holding on with everything she had left. The room was still, lit only by the silver glow of the clouded sky. And then, slowly, Eleanor opened her eyes one final time. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "Claire, don't give up on him. Promise me." Claire's throat tightened. Tears welled up and fell, silently. She wanted to promise, but the words wouldn't come. She only nodded, her heart breaking. Eleanor smiled faintly. Then her hand went limp. Rain tapped gently against the window as Claire let out a breathless sob, pressing her forehead to the edge of the bed. Eleanor Sterling was gone, and with her, the only love Claire had known in that house. Someone summoned Nathan. He entered with heavy steps, his shoes echoing in the wooden hallway. When he saw her, the woman who had raised him lying still, her lips no longer whispering hope, his world cracked. He didn't speak. He didn't cry, but his chest rose and fell in uneven waves, and his hands curled into fists at his sides. His eyes brimmed, refusing to release a single tear. Claire stood quietly, stepping back to give him space, but suddenly, his voice ragged and trembling cut through the room. "Are you satisfied now?" She turned, startled. "She's dead. You don't have to keep pretending anymore." Claire's breath caught. She looked at him at the pain etched into every line of his face, the grief twisting him into someone unrecognizable. She wanted to say, "I loved her. She was the only one who ever saw me," but the words remained buried. She simply lowered her gaze. But Nathan wasn't finished. Grief and rage collided in his chest, and he lashed out not because he wanted to hurt her, but because he couldn't contain what was destroying him from within. "You wore her love like armor. You made her weaker. Claire, don't act like you were innocent. You stayed for the money, for the inheritance, for this house, and now she's gone, because of you." His voice cracked. His hands trembled. "Get out. I don't want to see your face again." Claire stood motionless, every word slicing through her like glass. Not because she believed him, but because after everything, he still didn't see her. 6 months of silence, of cruelty, of emptiness. She had nothing left to give. "If that's what you want," she whispered, "I'll go." He didn't respond. His hands covered his face as he turned away, and Claire's shoulders trembling, eyes blurred with tears, walked out without another word. She passed through the hallway Eleanor once filled with laughter, a hallway Claire had once dreamed of decorating with art, with children's footsteps, with love. Now it was nothing but walls, a house she could no longer call home. That night, she didn't sleep. In her studio, the yellow light flickered above canvases half-finished and colors untouched. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper. With hands that trembled more from sorrow than fear, she wrote not a letter of defense, nor one of bitterness, just a few lines, simple, quiet, final. She folded the note carefully, hands steady despite the storm still raging inside her chest. With it, she placed a second document, a signed petition, simple and final. "I'm letting you go." She had written, "Please, be well." Claire didn't pack much, just a few sets of clothes, a small wooden box of paints, and the brush Eleanor had once gifted her, worn smooth by use and memory. She left behind everything else. No money, no jewelry. Not even the wedding dress Eleanor had once said made her shine like the morning. Claire didn't want anything that tied her to the life she was walking away from. She wanted to leave with nothing but herself, stripped of pain, pretense, and promises broken. As the sky began to shift from night to day, she stepped out onto the front path of Sterling Manor for the last time. The rain had stopped, leaving behind puddles that caught the light like mirrors. She paused near the edge of the drive and looked up toward the window that once held Eleanor's silhouette. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I tried, but I couldn't keep the promise." Then she turned, gripping the small suitcase in one hand, and walked into the fog-laced morning. She had no destination, no plan, but she knew she couldn't stay. Not with Nathan, not with the ghosts of what could have been. By the end of that day, Claire had vanished from the city. No calls, no messages, no goodbye. She cut every thread clean, as though she were erasing herself from Nathan Sterling's life one brushstroke at a time. The servants spoke in hushed tones about the woman who disappeared, but no one dared ask Nathan, not since Eleanor's death, not since the house had fallen into a kind of stillness it had never known before. In the days that followed, Nathan moved through that stillness like a shadow of himself. Eleanor's funeral was brief, quiet, respectful, attended only by those who had truly known her. Nathan stood before her grave, the wind tugging at his coat, his eyes distant and unreadable. He didn't speak, not a word. When he returned home, the note waited for him. Alongside it, the petition, and a folder. Inside were bank statements, documentation, a full record of every transaction Claire had redirected to the family's foundation, proof of every lie he'd believed, unraveling. Nathan read each page slowly. At first, he felt nothing. Then, something unfamiliar stirred. Not relief, not victory, emptiness. He crumpled the note in his hand and let it fall to the floor, telling himself this was what he wanted, what he had pushed her toward. Claire Bennett was gone, but as he wandered the halls, now cold and echoing, his mind betrayed him. He heard Eleanor's laughter again, faint and fleeting. He heard Claire's voice, soft and caring, in the room that once smelled of chamomile and old paperbacks. He ended up in her studio untouched since the night she left. On the easel stood one final canvas, a woman walking away through a field. Her figure half-painted, her face turned from the viewer. Nathan stared at it, his hands curling into fists. Something shifted. A tremor in the wall he had built over 6 long years, a crack too quiet to name, but too deep to ignore. Claire was gone, and all her silence had finally begun to speak. The cemetery was still, cloaked in the quiet that only autumn seemed to know. Wind swept gently through rows of weathered gravestones, carrying with it the faint scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. Nathan walked slowly down the gravel path, his footsteps steady but heavy, like each one cost him something. He reached a familiar spot, a modest headstone marked with time and sorrow. Ethan James Hayes, born 1990, gone too soon in 2020. Nathan knelt, setting a bundle of white daisies at the base. He sat down beside the grave, the stone cool against his back. From the pocket of his coat, He pulled a bottle of whiskey, the same kind he and Ethan once shared in the corner of a noisy dorm room, back when the world was still wide open. He poured a small splash onto the ground. "For you," he whispered, taking a slow sip. The burn was sharp. "You still owe me that one-on-one, you bastard." He gave a dry laugh, more breath than sound. Then silence again. Until her face, Claire's, appeared in his mind. Uninvited. It stung. Not like it used to. Not with fire, but with something colder. Like regret. For 5 long years. Nathan had believed a single truth, without question. Claire was the reason Ethan was gone. That belief had shaped every word he'd spoken to her. Every silence. Every cruelty. It had justified everything. But since the day she vanished, leaving behind her quiet note, the petition, and proof of the life she had tried to live with integrity, something inside him had started to crack. He hadn't admitted it, but he felt it. Something was wrong with the story he'd always clung to. A voice stirred him from his thoughts. "You're Nathan Sterling, aren't you?" He turned. A woman stood just a few feet away, holding a bouquet of violets in her hands. She looked around his age, early 30s, with shoulder-length golden hair and eyes like soft glass, tinged with sorrow. He recognized her almost immediately. "Sarah Miller?" he asked, voice rasping. She nodded and stepped closer, kneeling beside him to place her flowers next to his. "I couldn't not come today," she said quietly. "It's been 6 years. Nathan narrowed his eyes. He remembered Sarah vaguely from college. They had been acquaintances. Nothing more. And while she had been friendly with Ethan, he couldn't recall them ever being close enough to warrant a visit like this. "Since when were you and Ethan so close?" he asked, tone cooling. Sarah's expression faltered. She looked down at the violets in her lap, fingers gently adjusting the stems. A moment passed. Then she answered, voice barely above the wind. "You wouldn't know. Ethan didn't want anyone to know, especially you. But I was his girlfriend. Nathan. We were together for over a year before he died." Time seemed to pause. Nathan stared at her, the bottle slipping slightly in his hand. What he said, stunned. "That's not possible. Ethan. He loved Claire. She was the only one he ever talked about. The one he thought he loved." Sarah cut in, her voice calm but filled with quiet grief. "At one time. Yes. But that ended long before the accident. You just never saw it. You didn't want to." Nathan's thoughts scattered like leaves in wind. Everything he had believed, every judgment, every accusation, all built on a foundation Ethan himself had never confirmed. His certainty began to crumble. Sarah looked him in the eyes now, hers wet but unflinching. "I'm not saying Claire was perfect. But you don't know the whole story. Ethan had demons. He made choices. And he hid things from you because he didn't want to shatter the image you had of him." Nathan couldn't speak. His mouth was dry, his throat burning not from the whiskey, but from realization. "You've hated the wrong person," Sarah said softly. "And now she's gone. Because of that." She stood, brushing leaves from her coat. "I waited 6 years to tell you. Maybe I should have spoken sooner. But I didn't want to cause more pain. I just thought you should finally know the truth." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Nathan sitting in the middle of the cemetery, surrounded by whispers from the past and the sound of falling leaves. He stared at Ethan's grave. "You lied to me," he whispered, more to himself than to the stone. But the truth was he had lied to himself, and Claire had paid the price. A chill spread through Nathan's spine as if someone had peeled away the very air around him. He set the whiskey down slowly, his hands stiff, and leaned forward towards Sarah. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice low but strained. "Say it clearly." Sarah took a long breath, the kind you take when you're about to change something forever. Her eyes searched his not to challenge him, but to brace him. "Ethan and I started dating around 3 months before he died," she said quietly. By then, he and Claire were already over. Nathan's jaw tightened. "He told me she left him, that she destroyed him." Sarah shook her head. "No, he destroyed himself." Her voice didn't rise. She wasn't angry, just tired. "He cheated on Claire. With me. And she found out. She came to his apartment with a painting in her hands, a birthday gift. That's how she found us." Nathan's breath caught. Sarah continued, her words soft and measured, but heavy with guilt. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She just left. Walked into the rain. Ethan ran after her, begged her to forgive him. But she never looked back. That message you read in his phone, the one where she said, "Don't look for me anymore." That wasn't abandonment. That was heartbreak. Nathan sat frozen, his body rigid, but his mind spinning violently. The truth clashed with the years of rage he'd built up. Everything he had believed, every cruel word he'd spoken to Claire, every silence he'd used like a weapon, was based on a lie. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "No, Ethan wouldn't do that. He loved her. He told me he regretted it," Sarah said, interrupting gently. "But regrets don't erase betrayal." "He came back to me that night in tears, saying he had ruined the only good thing in his life. And then he drank. And then he drove." Nathan's hands clenched in his lap, his nails digging into his palms until pain forced him to release. He saw it all now, not just the events, but the meaning behind them. Claire's quiet resilience, her refusal to defend herself, the way she looked at him during the wedding not with fear, but with mourning. "You think you know everything about me, then go ahead and hold on to that hatred." He had, for years. And now the hatred had rotted into something far worse, remorse. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Nathan rasped, turning to Sarah with eyes dark and wet. "Why let me carry this for so long?" Sarah looked away, her own tears tracing down her cheeks. "Because I was ashamed," she whispered. "I was the reason they ended. After Ethan died, I couldn't face you. Or her. I didn't think I had the right to say anything." She wiped her face, then added, "But today, when I saw you here, still clinging to the wrong memory, I couldn't stay silent any longer. Claire didn't deserve what you did to her. She was never your enemy." Nathan turned his face toward Ethan's grave. The words on the stone blurred, so many years lost. So much cruelty, inflicted on a woman who had done nothing but carry his anger like it was her penance. He thought of the last thing she had written, in delicate handwriting that had once annoyed him with its perfect loops. "I'll set you free. Please, live well." At the time, he had dismissed it as another one of her performances. Now, he realized it was the farewell of someone who had given everything and been broken for it. He stood slowly, his legs trembling under the weight of regret. He turned to Sarah, who nodded silently and began to walk away, the bouquet of violets left behind like a soft apology. Nathan remained there, alone, not with his grief, but with the truth, and it hurt more than any lie ever had. Nathan stood beneath the gray sky, the cemetery behind him, the wind tugging at the corners of his coat. Autumn leaves scattered at his feet, unnoticed. His entire world had shifted not with thunder, but with quiet devastation. He had misjudged her. He had wounded her over and over while clutching a lie to his chest like it was truth. Now, Claire was gone. Not just gone from the manor, gone from his reach. And perhaps gone from the part of her heart that once might have forgiven him. He clenched his jaw, closing his eyes as if trying to hold back time itself. But the truth always comes too late. After his encounter with Sarah, Nathan returned to Sterling Manor, not as the master of a legacy, but as a man unraveled. The grand house, once a fortress of pride, now felt like a cavern echoing with ghosts. He wandered its halls like a stranger, pausing in the rooms where Eleanor once laughed, where Claire once moved quietly in the early mornings. He sat in the living room, sinking into an armchair. The silence pressed in from all sides. Images rose in his mind, not the ones twisted by anger, but the ones he had buried. Claire setting the breakfast table, even after he refused to eat. Claire by Eleanor's side, reading stories as the light faded. Claire in the art room, painting pain onto canvas while he scoffed from the doorway. And finally Claire, standing in silence at the party, when he tore her down in front of everyone. He remembered her eyes, not angry, just tired. Nathan bolted upright, his chest tight with urgency. "I have to find her," he whispered. "I have to tell her everything." But Claire had disappeared like a whisper on the wind. No phone number, no forwarding address, nothing. She had erased herself from his world. He started with everything she'd touched. Her files, her donation records, her old contacts from the charity programs. Every name, every detail. He hired investigators, reached out to those who had once volunteered beside her, traveled to art galleries that had hosted her student showcases. Nothing. She was nowhere. It was as if she had walked out of the story completely, leaving only unfinished sentences and hollow rooms. 2 months passed. Desperation took root in his chest. And yet, he kept reading the note she had left, over and over, like it might unlock a door somewhere. "I'll set you free. Please live well." At the time, he had thought it manipulative. Now he understood it was mercy. Mercy he had never earned. Then, finally, a whisper of hope. One of the investigators sent word a community center in a small seaside town was running a free art class for children. The teacher went only by Lena, no surname. But she matched the description perfectly. Warm brown eyes, gentle voice, a way of listening that made children feel seen. The town was called Haven Cove, over 300 miles from the city. Small, quiet. The kind of place someone went when they were done being found. Nathan didn't wait. He got in his car that same night and drove through the storm, the rain relentless against the windshield, the darkness thick and cold. But he didn't stop. Haven Cove emerged at dawn, sleepy and wrapped in mist. White cottages leaned into the wind, fishing boats bobbed in the harbor. The ocean stretched out like an old soul exhaling. Nathan parked the car at the edge of the gravel road, his heart thudding. He stepped out into the cool morning, the air sharp with salt, and for the first time in years, perhaps ever, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. By the time Nathan arrived in Haven Cove, the sky was just beginning to lift its veil of morning mist. He didn't stop to breathe in the sea air or take in the view of the quiet harbor. He made his way straight to the small community center, a simple building with a red-tiled roof and windows that opened to the sound of children's laughter. And there she was, Claire. She stood with a group of children, a paintbrush in one hand and a soft smile playing on her lips. She was wearing a gray sweater and jeans splattered with color. Her hair was loosely tied, strands catching the light like threads of honey. She was thinner than before, and her face wore a quiet weariness, but her eyes still carried the same quiet warmth that had once lived in the halls of Sterling Manor. Nathan stopped walking. His heart, usually so quiet in its coldness, now pounded with something unfamiliar. regret, awe, hope, all tangled into one. He took a step forward, but when Claire looked up and saw him, the smile vanished. Her eyes turned to steel, her expression unreadable. She looked away without a word, returning her attention to the children's drawings as if he were a stranger on the street. "Claire," he said, voice catching in his throat. She didn't look at him. "Keep painting. Kids," she murmured to the class, then turned her back to him. He took another step closer, his voice lower now, aching. "I know I don't deserve it, but I came to say I'm sorry. I know what happened with Ethan. I know the truth now. I was wrong." Claire turned slowly, and for the first time in a long while, he saw anger in her eyes. Not fury, but deep, quiet, righteous anger, the kind born not from hatred, but from deep wounds left unattended for too long. "Sorry," she echoed. "You think that's enough? You humiliated me. You cast me out. You made me believe that my silence was my shame." Her voice trembled, but she didn't. "You don't get to come here and undo years of pain with a handful of words." Nathan opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "I'm not your wife, Nathan. Not in any way that ever mattered." He stood there, breathing heavily, but refusing to leave. "We're not divorced," he said, quietly. "Not yet." Claire gave a hollow laugh, not amused, but disbelieving. "You think the law makes us anything? You never treated me like your wife. Don't use that word now to stake a claim you never honored." She turned her back again, and this time, she didn't look back. But Nathan didn't give up. He rented a small cottage near the edge of town, nothing like the manor, just enough to sleep and think. He joined the town's cleanup drives, bought coffee from the local shops, and helped repair benches by the pier. He didn't speak of Claire to anyone. He simply stayed. From a distance, he watched her rebuild what he had broken. She lived above a bakery, walked to work every morning, and spent her days surrounded by children's laughter and sunlight. She no longer looked like the woman he had left behind. She looked stronger, lighter, free. And she wasn't alone. One afternoon, Nathan saw him. A man with kind eyes and dark hair, a teacher named Lucas. He brought juice for the kids, fixed wobbly chairs, and laughed easily. He looked at Claire like she was sunlight after a storm, and she didn't turn away. She smiled, softly, genuinely. It was a smile Nathan had never seen not directed at him. The sight twisted something in his chest, a pang of jealousy. Yes, but deeper than that. Fear. Fear that maybe he had waited too long, that someone else had arrived in time to hold the pieces he had broken. Still, he tried again. One day, he brought flowers wild, local blooms, nothing grand, just honest. He approached the classroom quietly and waited until the children had gone. Then he offered them to her. Claire didn't take them. "Don't bring me flowers," she said. Her voice was calm, but final. "I don't need them, and I don't need you." Nathan swallowed hard. "Claire, Lucas doesn't hurt me," she said simply. "He doesn't make me feel small. He doesn't make me question if I'm worth loving." Those words struck deeper than any slap. He stood there, holding flowers she wouldn't take, and watched her turn away again this time, into a room filled with color and children, a life she had built without him. And for the first time, Nathan realized redemption wasn't just about apology. It was about becoming the man who could be forgiven, even if forgiveness never came. He had almost lost her. Not just to time or distance, but to the better man he never was. But instead of reacting with pride or pain, Nathan made a choice, the first honest one in a long time. He stayed, not to chase her with grand gestures, but to quietly, patiently earn the right to be near her again. He asked to help at the art center. At first, the staff were skeptical, and the children found him stiff and awkward. On his second day, he spilled an entire box of paint across the floor and over himself. The kids burst into laughter, delighted by the sight of the once cold man standing stunned and dripping with color. Claire had looked up from across the room, and for the first time since their wedding day, a tiny smile flickered across her lips. Fleeting, but real. From that moment, Nathan didn't stop trying. He fixed broken bike chains, repainted classroom walls, even attempted a painting of his own clumsy and uneven, which he shyly offered to Claire one morning. He wasn't Nathan Sterling, the CEO, anymore. He was just a man in rolled-up sleeves, kneeling to hammer nails and handing out juice boxes with paint still on his hands. But even as he changed, Claire remained distant. She had built something here, not just a new life, but a new self. And Lucas, the gentle teacher with kind eyes and quiet laughter, was now a steady presence by her side. Nathan saw it in the way Lucas carried extra supplies for her without being asked, in the way she leaned slightly toward him when she laughed. It was subtle, safe, and it wasn't his place to interrupt. But still, every night, as he sat in his small rented cottage overlooking the sea, he whispered to himself, "I won't give up on her. Not now. Not ever." And this time, he meant it not as a vow of possession, but of redemption. Not with power, not with pride, but with the part of his heart he had once locked away. Haven Cove bloomed beneath a golden summer sun, the sea humming its eternal lullaby. It was one of those afternoons when time felt slower, and the world softer. Claire stood just outside the community center, cradling a box of paints in her arms, her gaze following the children as they played on the grassy field nearby. Their laughter rang like bells across the breeze. This was her peace, this quiet life, this freedom she had carved out from sorrow. Nathan still appeared now and then, not to press her, but to show her who he was becoming. He helped carry easels, swept the floors after class, shared awkward jokes with the children. She saw the change, but her heart still carried scars, and scars don't fade easily. Lucas remained by her side, not with demands, but with presence. He never asked for more, but his affection was clear in every gesture, every glance, and Nathan saw it. Every time. It hurt, but he didn't resent it. Because for once, he understood Claire's happiness mattered more than his own redemption. That afternoon, Claire was setting up for an outdoor painting session near the edge of the field, where the gravel road dipped gently into town. Children were scattered with brushes and bright colors, the sun warming their heads. 6-year-old Tommy, all curls and mischief, chased a bouncing ball too far. It rolled across the grass and onto the narrow street. Claire looked up, and time stopped. A delivery truck, large and fast, rounded the curve at the wrong moment. "Tommy!" she shouted, the box of brushes falling from her hands. She didn't think. She ran. The truck was only meters away when it all unraveled. Tommy tumbled to safety, rolling across the grass with a frightened cry. But Claire, she had no time to move. The brakes screamed, burning rubber against pavement, but it wasn't enough. The truck clipped her with brutal force, sending her body crashing hard onto the road. She rolled, arms limp, blood blooming across her temple and thigh before everything faded to black. Nathan saw it all. His heart stopped. His voice cracked open. Claire. He ran without thought, without caution, into the road, just as the truck jerked forward again in panic. Its tail end swung wide, fast, and heavy like a beast lashing out blindly. Nathan threw himself toward her, his arms wrapping around her still form. He pulled her with all his strength, but he wasn't fast enough to fully escape. The truck's back end caught him square in the leg with a sickening crack, slamming him to the ground. Pain exploded through him, hot and sharp, but he didn't let go. He held Claire tightly, shielding her as best he could, their blood beginning to pool together on the cold asphalt. Screams broke out behind them. Children cried. Neighbors shouted. Lucas sprinted from the schoolhouse, his eyes wide with horror. He dropped to his knees beside them. "Call an ambulance," he shouted. Now the truck driver staggered out, pale and shaking, apologies tumbling from his lips. Within minutes, the townspeople gathered, forming a circle of panic and concern around the scene. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Nathan and Claire were rushed to the local hospital. Inside the emergency room, time became a blur. Claire was unconscious, suffering head trauma and deep lacerations on her leg. Nathan's femur was fractured, and he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. Still, he hadn't let go of her hand until the nurses forced him to. The hours that followed were long and uncertain. Claire woke first. The light above her bed was soft, but the ache in her body was sharp and deep. She winced, tried to sit up, but the dizziness held her still. A nurse approached, her voice gentle. "You're safe now." "And so is the boy." Claire's eyes fluttered open fully. "Tommy? Is he okay?" The nurse smiled. "He's fine. Thanks to you. But the man who pulled you out of the road, he's in the room next door. He's badly hurt." Claire's breath caught. Nathan. Memories rushed back, the shout, the arms around her, the impact. "Nathan," she whispered. Just then, Lucas entered the room. His eyes were red, his face pale from worry. He rushed to her side and gently took her hand. "Claire, you're awake." "Thank God. I thought—" He couldn't finish. Emotion broke his words. Claire nodded slowly, squeezing his hand, but her gaze drifted past him, toward the door that led to Nathan's room. Lucas followed her eyes, and in that moment, his heart broke a little. He saw what she hadn't said, what she hadn't dared to feel until now. Nathan regained consciousness hours later, the setting sun casting golden light across the hospital walls. He blinked up at the ceiling, then down at the thick bandages wrapping his leg. His body screamed with pain, but his mind only clung to one thought: is she okay? The door creaked open. A nurse wheeled someone in slowly. Claire, despite her own injuries, she had insisted. She needed to see him. Their eyes met. No words at first, only silence heavy, fragile, and thick with all the things they had never said. Finally, Claire spoke. Her voice was hoarse, but steady. "Why did you do it? You could have died." Nathan gave her a tired, crooked smile, pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "If you had died, I wouldn't have wanted to live either." He paused, his voice softer now. "You left once. I couldn't lose you again." Claire lowered her eyes, and tears slipped free, slow, silent, aching. She remembered everything: the cruel words, the nights of silence, the day she walked away. But she also remembered his trembling hands as he helped repaint the classroom, his awkward smile when the children laughed, and now this moment when he had thrown himself into danger without hesitation. She reached for his hand. This time, she didn't let go. "You hurt me." Claire's voice was barely a whisper, trembling like a leaf in the wind, so deeply. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget it. I'm not even sure if I can forgive you." Nathan didn't flinch. He didn't try to justify himself. He simply reached out, his hand slow and shaking, pain flaring through his leg with every movement. Their fingers touched. "I know," he said, voice thick with remorse. "I know I don't deserve it." He met her eyes, tired, red. but still luminous with a strength he had once broken. But after you left, I understood what real emptiness is. I don't want to live in a world without you. Claire, please, don't leave again. I'll spend every day proving I've changed. Claire didn't answer at first, but her hand tightened around his. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, not from weakness, but from the weight of too many unspoken emotions. And in that moment, her silence was an answer of its own. Outside the room, Lucas stood motionless in the hallway. He had seen it all, the hands entwined, the tears, the quiet reunion of two people who had been lost to each other. His heart ached, but his smile, though faint, was real. He stepped quietly into Claire's room later that evening. She looked up in surprise. He didn't say much, just placed a small bouquet of violets on her bedside table. "I'm glad you found your way back to happiness," he said gently. "I wish you both the very best." Then he turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps disappearing down the hall, and he didn't look back. In the hospital room, Claire and Nathan sat together in silence. No more apologies, no more explanations, just their hands, still joined, a promise, written without words, to try again. This time, with honesty. This was their true turning point, not the accident, but the decision, born from pain, to believe in love again. Autumn had returned to Haven Cove. The breeze carried the scent of salt and earth, and the maple leaves painted the streets in brilliant reds and golds. 2 months had passed since that day. Nathan now walked without crutches, though he still limped slightly on bad days. Claire, too, had resumed teaching, though her left leg ached when she pushed herself too far. But the real healing wasn't in their bodies. It was in their hearts. Nathan didn't ask for more than she could give. He remained in Haven Cove, living in a small, sunlit house not far from the community center. He continued to volunteer quietly, helping the children with their messy projects, fetching supplies, listening more than he spoke. He brought Claire coffee on cool mornings, carried chairs when she was tired, sat beside her in peaceful silence while she painted, his presence steady and sincere. No grand declarations, just a steady offering of presence. Claire watched him unsure, at first. She remembered everything. The cruel words, the nights filled with silence, the walls she had built to survive him. But she also saw this new version of him, humbled, clumsy, earnest. He wasn't trying to win her back. He was simply showing up, and piece by piece, the walls around her heart began to crumble. One late afternoon, as the sky flamed orange and the sea shimmered with the last light of day, Claire found Nathan at the pier. It was where he often went when the world became too loud. He stood there now, facing the water, hands in his pockets, his sleeves rolled up, paint still on his forearm from class. She walked up behind him, the breeze tugging at her hair. "Nathan." He turned, surprised, but didn't speak. Claire took a breath. "The kind you take before everything changes. Can we talk?" Nathan stood at the edge of the pier, his sleeves rolled up, gaze cast over the endless horizon. The sea stretched before him, quiet and vast, like a mirror to his thoughts. When Claire approached, he heard her footsteps before her voice. "Nathan," she said softly, yet with unmistakable resolve. "We need to talk." He turned, his deep-set eyes meeting hers with a flicker of hope and fear. He nodded, saying nothing, and motioned toward the old wooden bench nearby. They sat side by side, the silence between them filled not with distance, but with the sound of crashing waves and wind weaving through tall grasses. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Claire broke the stillness. "I've thought a lot," about everything. You coming here, what you've done since, and what happened that day. Her voice faltered briefly, but she continued. I know you've changed. I see it in the way you are with the children, the way you speak, the way you look at me now. But I'm scared. Nathan, I'm afraid that if I let you in again, I might lose myself again. Nathan's hands curled slightly in his lap, the pain in her words sharper than anything his body had endured. He turned toward her, his voice low, but steady. You don't owe me forgiveness, he said. What I did, the way I treated you, I carry it with me every day. I thought I knew who you were, but I was blind. And I broke something sacred between us. I don't want to erase the past. Claire, I just want a chance to build something new. Not because I need to be forgiven, but because I want to love you the way I should have from the beginning. And if you let me, I'll spend my life showing you that love shouldn't hurt, that it can be safe, gentle, true. His words landed like a warm current in the coldest part of her chest. She lowered her gaze, and for a moment, said nothing. Then the tears came not from sorrow this time, but from release. She remembered Eleanor's voice. He's not a bad man, just a broken one. And she remembered the moment Nathan had thrown himself into the road to save her not as penance, but instinct. Love. Claire looked up at him, a trembling smile on her lips. I'm not promising forgiveness will be easy, but I want to try. Let's start again. Nathan, not as we were, but as who we've become. Nathan's breath caught. He reached for her hand, not urgently, but gently. And when she placed hers in his, he smiled the first real unguarded smile she had seen from him in years. Thank you, he whispered. You'll never have to be afraid again. Not with me. They didn't rush. They rebuilt slowly with long walks by the sea, small conversations over morning coffee, and afternoons spent with paint and quiet laughter. Nathan still traveled to the city to manage what remained of his company, but his home was now Haven Cove. With her. Claire opened her world piece by piece, showing him her half-finished paintings, telling him about dreams she had buried long ago, and Nathan listened, not to respond, but to learn. 1 year later, the beach was quiet that morning. Waves whispered against the shore. Seagulls danced in the sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and blooming wildflowers. Claire wore a simple white dress. Her hair was loose, kissed by the wind. Nathan stood beside her. No suit, no tie, just a linen shirt and his heart wide open. They stood surrounded by friends from town, the children from her art class giggling in the front row, holding tiny handmade paper flowers. This wasn't a grand ceremony. There were no chandeliers or marble halls, only the sea, the sky, and two people who had once been broken, now vowing to heal together. Nathan took her hand, his voice thick with emotion. I once judged you through the lens of my own pain, and I lost you because of it. But today, I stand here not to undo the past, but to promise you this: I will never let you carry pain alone again. I will protect you, honor you, and love you fully, quietly, forever. Claire's eyes shimmered. She smiled, the kind that only comes from healing. And I promise, she said, to believe in love again, because of you. They sealed their vows not with spectacle, but with silence, the kind that comes when two souls have found peace. And as the waves clapped quietly on the shore, they stepped forward not into a perfect future, but into a true one. Together, the end of Book 1. But the beginning of a love that was earned, not given. Claire smiled, her eyes shimmering with joy as she looked at the man beside her. I promise, she whispered, to walk beside you not because I have to, but because I believe in the love we've built together. Their vows, spoken beneath the open sky, were not about perfection. They were about truth. And as the waves hummed in the background and the children ran through the sand with laughter like music, Claire and Nathan held hands, their hearts finally at peace. Later that night, the celebration continued beneath a canopy of stars. A bonfire crackled on the beach, casting a golden glow on the faces of friends, neighbors, and children who had become part of their journey. Claire and Nathan sat quietly near the fire, gazing at the moonlit ocean. They didn't need to speak. They had arrived after pain, after growth, after choosing love again. In the months that followed, they created something greater than themselves, a way to honor the past and plant seeds for the future. They founded the Eleanor Sterling Foundation, named after the woman who had once seen light in both of them when no one else had. The mission was simple: bring free art education to underprivileged children across the country. It began in Haven Cove, where they expanded the modest community center into a vibrant art school filled with brushes, colors, and the wild laughter of children who had never dared to dream before. Claire taught with heart. Nathan, once a man of cold ledgers and boardrooms, now poured his energy into organizing exhibitions, raising funds, and building new classrooms in nearby towns. Their love had become a kind of legacy, not carved in marble, but splashed across canvases in bright, unfiltered color. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills and the new classroom buzzed with young voices and smudged paint, Claire turned to Nathan with quiet awe. "This," she said, eyes shining. "This is what I used to dream of, sharing beauty with those who need it most." Nathan wrapped his arms around her, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "No," he murmured. "Thank you for giving me the chance to become the man who could build this with you." They stood there for a long time, not saying much, just holding each other, surrounded by the warmth of children's joy and the golden light of a life redeemed. Some stories end in heartbreak, others in reunion. But the most powerful stories, the ones that stay, are those where love grows through mistakes, forgiveness, and time. And this was one of them. A message from Shining Stories. When you love someone, don't let pride or pain speak louder than the truth. Don't let assumptions cloud your vision, because sometimes the one you're pushing away is the one who loves you most purely. Thank you for following Claire and Nathan's journey. If their story touched your heart, leave us a comment below. Tell us, have you ever had to choose between holding on or letting go? If you believe in love that endures, love that grows beyond the wounds, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Shining Stories for more heartfelt tales that heal, inspire, and remind us love, when chosen again and again, is the greatest story of all. Let's cherish every fragile, beautiful moment we're given. Together.